psychology of contentment and also psychology of discontentment, incidentally. Now, coming to one subject, if you want to get an idea of what it means to experience inner contentment, you can find from your own life. Suppose we do some noble deed without any selfish motive, including coming to a place like this or any spiritual place in any tradition, and do some unselfish service. Either it may be cooking in the kitchen here, arranging the chairs, contacting people. It could be in any tradition. Now when you do that, what do you get actually? There is a statement in Sanskrit, prayojanam anuddishya na mantopi pravartate. It's a statement, it means nobody could do anything, nobody does anything without any purpose. It may not be selfish purpose, but even after doing the most unselfish, the most broad-minded activity, without any motive, we get something out of it. We may not be going for it, we may not be seeking that, but we get it. A kind of inner contentment when you do some service, some work for helping others, for helping people in distress, or doing some kind of an act of service for any noble purpose. You get a kind of inner satisfaction. Without this, we won't be doing anything. Suppose you go on doing some very unselfish, wonderful things and you get a lot of pain only, you won't be doing it in fact. It's the fuel that keeps you moving forward, that keeps the momentum intact. That's why you find all over the world big captains of industry, billionaires and philanthropists, after making a lot of money, maybe through questionable means, the early stages, and after some stage, after reaching some level of prosperity, success and achievement, they starting foundations, trusts for helping fighting Ebola, AIDS and epidemic diseases in the sub-Saharan countries, backward parts of the world. How do they do that? Because they feel they need to do that, otherwise they can't survive, they can't even live actually. So there is always a tendency for us to move forward, and after doing this, they get a kind of inner satisfaction. You have to use that word for want of a better term in language. And for that they're doing it. When they give donation, big donation, or start a foundation or a trust for helping people in distress, facing calamities, natural calamities, epidemics. After doing this, they get a kind of inner fulfillment. For that they are doing it. They may not be karma yogis in the classic sense of the term. They may not be spiritual seekers, spiritual aspirants in the conventional sense of the term. They may not even believe in God. There are many wonderful people, humanists, who are agnostics, who do wonderful things for others. If you ask them, why are you helping? They may not be believing in God, or they may not have any faith in a transcendental moral authority. But still they do that because out of that they derive something subtle. This is contentment. And for enjoying this contentment, you don't even have to believe in God, because it's a spiritual asset, spiritual capital that we accumulate by doing good deeds. And this in many ways could happen even when you think a noble thought. You get a kind of inner contentment. If that activity is linked to any selfish purpose, you won't get that contentment. Because the contentment is what you get after doing this unselfish deed. If there is the slightest bit of selfish motive, then the contentment, you won't get it. You lose it. So this is a classic example. So if anybody wants to get an idea of what contentment means in a purely psychological sense, this is an example. And this is not even linked to any religion or faith in God or anything. It's what really we experience when we try to do some unselfish deed. But because this activity is not linked to a selfish motive, very often, as I said earlier, there's an invisible binding, a link between what we do and its immediate consequences, results, and our concern for the results. Our concern for the result is the result of attachment or selfishness. When that concern is absent, contentment is the result. Contentment comes as the result of any of these unselfish deed, thought, or word. This is a classic example. Now, very often we have one problem, and that is related to pragmatism or utilitarianism. That is, we sometimes want a complete, thorough analysis of how this happens. We want a GPS system in spiritual life, so to speak. So sometimes I have encountered on many occasions questions, well, after this what? After this what? So it means, suppose we try to explain any spiritual sadhana, spiritual practice, very often people ask questions, well, after practicing for some years, what happens? But what happens after practicing for some years cannot be intellectually explained, but can only be internally experienced, really speaking. So when you drive from one place to another, you can have a clear GPS system. You know which way to go. You know where to reach first, and then what's the next stage. But in spiritual life, it's a different rule. It doesn't function that way. Because we may be able to control the most complicated machine, but we have no idea how our own mind is going to work next moment. See, we can be very sure, we can determine how a very complex machine is going to function. Because the machine borrows its intelligence from us. But we can never be sure what thought is going to emerge in our mind next moment. This is not control. So very often in spiritual life, we ask questions. In fact, this questioning, doubts, and then constant inquiry has got two aspects. One, in its positive aspect that takes you beyond it, and other, the negative aspect that keeps you rotating along the wheel of questioning. So one comes out of intellectual arrogance, the other is rooted in sincere eagerness to know, to evolve, to go beyond, to go ahead. So one is like a wheel, when you rotate along the wheel, you never come out of it. You are always within the wheel, you are rotating along with the wheel. The other one is like a straight line progression. So real intellectual questioning, which is part of spiritual life, takes us beyond doubt. On the other hand, skeptical approach, skeptical attitude will keep us rotating along the wheel. I can give one example from the life of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda was an agnostic actually. When he was going to Scottish Church College, he was an agnostic. He didn't even believe in God. Of course, it's wrong to say that he was an atheist. But it may not be a fact to say that he was a conventional believer in God. Because very often he doubted. In fact, once he walked and got tired, he sat under the Octillani monument and he said, "Oh, what a terrible world. If I could have made a better world than this." So he was questioning even the intelligence of God created this world. So he was an agnostic. And Sri Ramakrishna liked him all the more because he was an agnostic. So he used to ask Sri Ramakrishna questions. Sri Ramakrishna didn't mind. Because he understood that Swami Vivekananda's inquiries and doubts were rooted in his thirst, in his hunger to know more, to evolve. So a sincere inquiry will take us beyond doubt, beyond skepticism, beyond itself. But very often, doubts will arise in our mind, and these doubts may not be rooted in a very sincere, eager thirst for knowledge. This may not be a conscious phenomenon. In life, mind plays many funny tricks. You find many problems arise when you become a spiritual seeker. If you are living the world, these problems don't arise. So very often, spiritual practice is sometimes compared to the efforts of a person who is trying to clean up a lake. So a lake which is, let us say, 100 feet deep. Only at the surface you get pure water. Below it may be 95 feet, different layers of mud, weeds and bacteria and many such things, So when you take a long pole, long stick and try to stir it, all these bacteria and mud and dirt will come to the surface. But that's only the process of cleaning up the lake. But if you don't disturb the lake, it remains dirty and filthy, but then it never gets clean, so there is no disturbance. So if we don't make any effort to open a new chapter in our life, to start spiritual life, there will be no doubts, no skepticism. Skepticism and doubt sometimes emerge the moment we start a sincere inquiry. In fact, that's one green signal that shows that we are on the right track. So we have to keep in mind the tendency of the mind to move like a wheel that goes on rotating and keeping us as part of this rotating wheel, never allowing us to come out of it. So doubts are of two types: sincere, eager doubts that helps you in your momentum. The other doubt, which keeps us rotating along with the wheel, never permitting us to come out, and leads to skepticism, doubt, and frequently the pendulum moves to the other extreme. We feel, the spiritual inquiries, religion, all these are meaningless things. So one point we have to keep in mind, especially those who look for contentment, is it should be built upon sincere inquiry for knowing the truth and for evolving beyond doubts and skepticism. So that's one thing. And how do we achieve this contentment? As I said, the thread that connects our action and its result should be severed. That's the first process. And then we won't be concerned. Then we won't be anxious. We won't be obsessed with the result. So long as we remain concerned about what results are going to emerge, what results we are going to get, in what way we are going to be benefited by our actions, there can be no contentment. And that could be understood when we keep this in mind. There is no GPS system in spiritual life. I know I have to drive home this idea with a few illustrations. I can give an example. For example, very ordinary example. So suppose you go to a library. This often happens. Or you go to a place, you listen to a wonderful lecture, a prayer, in church or synagogue or temple, anywhere. Let us say we read a book. And when we read that book, suddenly we are caught. There are some wonderful ideas. One book that I can give from Christian tradition, example is The Way of a Pilgrim, is written by, it's a kind of autobiography, written by a very ordinary person. He was a peasant. He lived in 19th century. He was a member of the Russian Orthodox Church, not a monk or a priest, but a very ordinary person. He could barely read and write, and in fact, the story of a Russian peasant. One day he went to a church in his village. It's a Russian Orthodox church. They're very rigid, almost fanatical, but Russian Orthodox Church produced maybe the maximum number of mystics in Christian tradition. And not dozens, scores of them. And the Philokalia and the number of Christian fathers, and there are so many. Anyway, I'm not going to those details. This is a very ordinary example. An ordinary Russian peasant. One day he went to his church, and remember, this is not legend. He wrote his own experiences in the form of an autobiography, and that was found in a manuscript form in Mount Athos in Greece. The Greek and Russian Orthodox denominations are similar to each other in many ways. And interestingly, in the Russian Orthodox Church, they have many of these traditions which they may have got from Hinduism through Buddhism, because Buddhism was very popular in Central Asian republics for quite a long time, several centuries. So one day he went to a church and he listened to a sermon. The sermon was a description of unceasing prayer, continuous prayer. How we can keep our mind in a state of perpetual, natural, effortless prayer, prayerful mood. So it comes from St. Paul's first epistle to Thessalonians. This man was not a biblical scholar. He was not so well educated, but he could read and write somewhat. So as he listened to this prayer, to his sermon on the first epistle, only one sentence caught him. That is a sentence related to the secret of unceasing prayer, ceaseless prayer. How to keep our mind in a state of perpetual prayerfulness, so to speak. And he was interested. And he forgot everything else, and he started his journey in search of a person who could teach him this technique of unceasing prayer. Mind you, you find unceasing prayer in the name of Ajapa Japa in the Naradiya Bhakti Sutras, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras, and Bhagavata Purana. There are long descriptions and definitions of unceasing prayer, continuous prayer. But anyway, so he started his journey. After traveling hundreds of miles along, big country, in those days. It was before the emancipation of Serbs in Russia. So it was a very totalitarian, very socially very backward country. So unlike the more politically and socially more advanced West European countries like Britain, Sweden, and Germany and other countries. So Russia was somewhat backward, semi-agrarian society, but it produced many great mystics in the Russian mystical tradition. So this man went his journey, and his goal was to go to Jerusalem. That is English. So he planned to walk all the way to Odessa, cross the sea, and then finally go towards Jerusalem. And on the way he was ambushed, he was tortured, he was In fact, he didn't have anything with him, but still robbers tried to take away the dry bread. That is the only thing that he carried in his bag. So by begging, he lived by begging. And at one stage in his travels, he met a Christian monk who lived in a tiny cell in his monastery, who offered to teach him the secret of unceasing prayer. So I'm just cutting a long story short as far as possible. But when he listened to this and when he learned this, he felt a complete satisfaction. I mean, he felt there was no need for him even to move further and go towards Jerusalem. Finally, he did not go to Jerusalem, he returned. But so the story, if you read it, you understand. When he learned from a monk, Russian Orthodox monk, who allowed him to stay in his tiny cell for some time alone, and he learned that, he felt a complete inner joy and satisfaction. So all the pains, fatigue and exhaustion associated with long travels along forests, steppes, all that completely vanished. And then he said he felt a great compassion for the whole world. He kind of inner fulfillment. You find many such examples in the devotional classics of Vedanta and Hinduism, Bhagavata Purana, Shandilya Bhakti Sutras and others. As I mentioned, Nityotsavam Bhavati. So it comes from the Bhagavata Purana and describing the internal contentment of Prahlada. Now how did he reach this level of contentment? One may ask the question, can we have that kind of contentment in our daily life, living in a very complex, very active, very competitive society where we have to work hard every day for several hours? The answer is yes. And Bhagavad Gita gives a clue to this question. So it talks about karma yoga. So karma is inevitable. Activity is unavoidable. And it is also true, it's also a fact that every form of activity has some problem. There is no activity without some problem of other. We may succeed in reaching the highest goal in some profession, but that success may not be always there. There is always changing, it's always fluctuating. So how to keep the mind in a state of perpetual steadiness? For that, activity should be joined with yoga. So yoga brings in the spiritual element, and activity is already there. You know, Lord Krishna makes a statement in the Gita, Nahi kasik kshanamabi jadu tishtati akarmakrit. We cannot keep quiet even for one kshana, means one split second. Even if you are physically inactive, mentally, intellectually will be active, will be thinking. So we can never be in a state of perfect and complete mental, physical and psychological inactivity. It's impossible. And at the same time, as I said, action is always linked to some problem of other. Not necessarily. Some actions produce 100% results, expected results, joyful results. But very often actions do not produce such a result. So how to face this problem? So action should be linked to yoga. And when you combine action, that is karma, and yoga, it becomes karma yoga. So how do we link it? Through non-attachment. Non-attachment towards what? Non-attachment to the results, not non-attachment to action. So that should be understood. Karma yoga doesn't ask us to be non-attached to action. Non-attachment is only to the result of action. And this non-attachment should never be negligence or indifference or complacency towards the result. As I said, when we take away our concern and anxiety for the result, then we will be able to focus more energy and more attention on whatever work we are doing. Then the action produces more results, better results. So, in a way, to use the American language, it is a win-win situation, so to speak. You gain both ways. So when karma becomes karma yoga, through this mechanism of non-attachment, not to action, but to results of actions, without being negligent, without being indifferent, is called karma yoga. And this keeps our mind in a state of perpetual contentment. This is one important thing. Now I shall go back to the example that I mentioned earlier. Suppose you go to a library, take a book on spiritual topic, or go to a lecture. We listen to some wonderful ideas, and we may be impressed. Now, our state of mind after listening to the lecture, after reading the book, and our state of mind before we stepped into the library will be totally different. This we often forget. That's a very interesting point. So we sit somewhere in an easy chair and we ask, well, what happens after some years of spiritual practice? In fact, with this mind we are trying to analyze what would be our mental condition after practicing spirituality for some years. It is totally foolish really, it is only irrational, because the mind with which we'll be thinking about next step after some years will be totally different from the present state of our mind. That's why I said no, there cannot be a GPS system in spiritual life, because at every stage we find our mind itself evolves. This we frequently forget when we think of problems. That's a very, very interesting aspect that we very often we overlook or we forget. So when we go on thinking about what happens next, what will be the next step, we forget that the next step will become obvious to us when we take the first step. When we take the first step, after completing the first phase of our spiritual evolution journey, the next phase becomes obvious. Unlike in GPS system here. Here you can predict, you can determine from now itself how you are going from here to another place. But not in mental life, not in spiritual life. So that is an important point to remember for those who want to cultivate contentment. Because discontentment is always rooted in perpetual skepticism and doubtfulness. Once we understand this is a problem, a natural problem of the mind, then the problem will no longer be a problem. See, problem is a problem when we don't recognize it as a problem. When we recognize this as a natural play of the mind, then it will be no more a problem. So this is an important point we have to keep in mind. Another serious impediment or obstacle in cultivating inner contentment is much more common. We often draw a line of demarcation, dividing line between secular and spiritual, between our ordinary life activities and problems and spiritual practice. So spiritual practice is something linked to retreats, prayers, reading or meditation, puja, whatever it may be. And life is something different. Now, one important method to cultivate inner contentment is to spiritualize the secular and not secularize the spiritual. That's also a problem, one of the problems. So how to spiritualize the secular? Again, we have to come back to the subject of karma yoga. As I said, action, activity is part of our daily life, profession. And we cannot keep quiet for one split second, mentally, physically. Even if you are physically inactive, mentally you will be active. And action is invariably linked to some problems. I mean, the uncertainty of the result that causes anxiety and that creates discontentment. So, how to spiritualize the secular, how to establish a link from secular to spiritual. And there is only one way, looking upon every act as a spiritual phenomenon, as a spiritual activity. Everything is spiritual. Because our mind is the same, whether in secular life, non-spiritual life or spiritual life. Mind is always the same. So, how to spiritualize the secular? Looking upon every action as a kind of worship. Is it really possible? We may teach in a university or working in an office, driving the car, all this, can it be spiritual? As spiritual as praying or meditating or doing puja? It's a natural question, may arise. So many of our great spiritual teachers give the example, that is, mentally link ourselves to the infinite. Looking upon all these empirical duties and responsibilities as necessary, but simultaneously we must think of something beyond this. The impermanence of the phenomenal world. I know this is a metaphysical problem linked to Advaita. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmahivanapara. This is the basic principle. The world is Mithya. The world is not unreal, but world is relative. Mithya doesn't mean unreal. Mithya doesn't mean imaginary or non-existent. Mithya means the relative. And relative means what is subject to changes. And everyone can understand this. The world is subject to change. A profession or duty, responsibilities, all these are subject to changes. So, how to look upon all the duties and responsibilities that we are engaged in as part of the relative, and how to link ourselves to the infinite. From an intellectual point of view, we can understand this. You know, this earth, this cosmos itself is part of relativity. In the sense, it did not exist before Big Bang and it ceased to exist after the Big Crunch, if it was going to happen. The cosmos itself is impermanent. In the sense, it had a beginning and therefore it will have an end. This is pure metaphysics. And every well-educated person in modern times will tell you this cosmos is subject to changes. It cannot remain in the same status quo condition for infinite time. No, it's not possible. So what is beyond this impermanent relative phenomena? So Vedanta tells you Atman. That's Vedantic answer. Atman or Brahman. As the immanent spiritual principle within us, it's called Atman. As the omnipresent transcendental reality, it's called Brahman. The same. Well, if we cannot believe God as infinite, immanent and omnipresent, we can think of one absolute reality that is beyond changes. Because the fact of change itself points to something which is beyond changes. So, Vedanta tells you, looking upon all our duties and responsibilities related to life in this world as relative, as impermanent, is one way of linking ourselves to the permanent, to the infinite. Once we do that, then we'll be able to enjoy contentment. And so that's what Lord Krishna meant Sukham atyandikam yattat buddhigrahyam atindriyam. So the joy that is absolute, as I said, as a coin with only one side, a joy which is really not the absence of pain, but joy itself positively, that joy is linked to the infinite. You can never be in a state of perpetual contentment if you live to this phenomenal relative world alone. Impossible. It doesn't mean that we should neglect the world. That should be kept in mind. A lot of criticism against Vedanta you find. Vedanta tells you this world is unreal, which is ridiculous in a way. Vedanta never tells you this world is unreal. Vedanta tells you that this world is relative, in the sense impermanent. What's the meaning of impermanence or relativity? It is subject to changes. It doesn't remain the same condition for all times, any more than our actions do not produce the same expected result all the time. So what Vedanta tells is, beyond and behind this relative changing phenomena, there is an infinite unchanging reality, and that is what Vedanta postulates as Atman or Brahman. And that's our true nature. So beyond the physical, beyond the intellectual, beyond the mental, we have a higher dimension to our personality. And that personality is the spiritual personality. So once we understand this, then contentment becomes possible. Very often the problem is, many things we try to believe. People think I believe in God, I believe in all this. But in actual life, our belief is not what it should be. I can give you an example. Now the time is, let us say, 11:10. It's a fact. Can we believe in God with the same sense of reality with which we believe it is 11:10 now? So the reality of the real is different with regard to different things in the world. Say this is Pittsburgh, there is no doubt about it. It's a reality. So God is real when we say I believe in God. So believing in God, is it as real? That belief as real as the belief that this is Pittsburgh? So you find there is a gradation of reality to the real. So one way of cultivating contentment is to give a promotion to our concept of the real in spiritual matters. Very often, I believe God is real. It only means I want to believe that God is real. It is like desire to believe. But that desire itself is sincere, maybe, of course. If it is really real, then we all become mystics. But Sri Ramakrishna could not believe in this world, he could believe only in God. For ordinary spiritual seekers, it's difficult to believe in God because the world is so real. So you can see both the extremes. So in a very subjective sense, this is something that we often do not notice. When we try to believe in God, believe in spiritual values, it only means we want to believe in the reality of spiritual values. It's only a desire to believe. When we believe that it's Pittsburgh, it is real belief. So can we upgrade the reality of the real in which we try to believe? When we upgrade it, then contentment becomes real. That's why making our actions and thoughts as unselfish as possible is one royal pathway towards contentment. As I said earlier, when we do something noble, even a noble thought, a noble idea, a noble activity, even when we try to help a person to cross the street, let's say blind man, we help him to cross the street. We pay check, you send a check to earthquake victims in some far off lands. That night you will be able to sleep better. That's why rich people do that. They are forced to do that. They may not admit it. Because that action produces a kind of inner vibration. That's contentment. And that contentment becomes real when our belief becomes more real. As I said, the reality of the real is a very important aspect in spiritual life. So yoga alone can help us in upgrading the reality of the real. And this helps us to spiritualize the secular. And when we spiritualize the secular, then the line of demarcation between secular and spiritual vanishes, and then contentment becomes real. Very often, if you put this idea before people, one very question that frequently they ask, what are the problems in life? See, when we are in a temple or a church, or when we are engaged in some spiritual activity, feeling of inner contentment will come. But then problems and crises and challenges in life, in professional life, in economic life, social life, all this. Now here, there is a statement in one of our ancient scriptures. It comes in one of the Puranas. It addresses this problem. I shall quote this verse. Yasya anugraham ichchami tasya vittam haramiham bandhavaischa viyogena prasam bhavati dukkha dukkhida tena dukkena santapto yadi mam na parityaje tam prasadam karishyami yadevairapi sudurlaham. It's a very interesting verse. How to confront problems and challenges in negative situations. So the statement of the verse, the classic is this. God tells you that when I want to help somebody, then I want to remove him from the path of obstacles, and I want to remove the obstacles from his path. Say a rich man who was for some time a devotee, and then he becomes too much concerned, too much obsessed with his wealth, proud of his wealth. So slowly he gets more attached to his money and wealth than to spiritual values. But if God wants to help him, then he turns him into a pauper. That's literally means. And then if we are very proud of great reputation, if we become celebrities in society, and we become proud of that, it takes us away from spiritual path. That God gets ourselves isolated from everybody, so that we'll be forced to turn to God, or let us say towards higher values. When we are pressed by circumstances, when we are cornered by circumstances, we step aside and ask the question, well, is this all that we have got? Is there nothing beyond this bank balance, wealth, money, status, Medicare, insurance? There is nothing beyond this? Is there something else to my personality? Am I in need of something more than all this? So this question we ask only when we are pressed by circumstances. So the verse tells you, if God wants to help you, then He puts you in such a situation, in a set of circumstances, where you'll be forced to open your eyes and ask the question, well, is there something beyond these visible things? Beyond the sensual pleasures or secular things? Is there higher value? Or am I just this body or mind? Is there a higher dimension to my personality? This question arises. Even if you have made some attempt in our life to ask this question, It will take us beyond. It will help us at one stage or other in our life. So, one of our scriptures illustrate this point with the help of a story. The story is found in the Bhagavata Purana. The story of an old man who was about to die. Now, in his early days, he was brought up as a God-fearing boy. Till he reached his youth, he led a very ideal life. It is called Ajamila Upakhyanam in Bhagavata, the story of Ajamila. There's many commentaries. So, when he was young, he was brought up as a God-fearing person. He led an ideal life. He was an ideal son. He played the role of a son to his parents and his brother to his other siblings in an ideal way. But when he reached his middle age, before he reached his middle age, he had a deviation. He had a fall and he fell into bad company, bad associations, and he became a profligate. He became what do you call it? Lost. He was completely lost. He became lost. So he became a scourge to the people living around. He became a scourge to his own parents. Now he was about to die. He had become very old. So the story is this: when he was about to die, he became totally helpless. Now when you are facing the last moments, even if you are a well-trained diplomat, you cannot smile because your natural instincts and accumulated samskaras will come to the surface. That's why in one of the Upanishads there's a prayer, the prayer of a dying man. He tells himself, "Oh mind, please remember your good thoughts, good ideas, because I want to die with a peaceful mind." So Kridam Smara, there is a long prayer to the end of the Ishavasya Upanishad. So dying man is addressing himself, rather his mind. "Oh mind, please remember all the noble thoughts associated with good actions that you have done in the past, so that I can die with a peaceful mind." Okay, now this man, Ajamila, that is the name, he was about to die. He had a son, and his son's name was Narayana. Narayana is a synonym of Vishnu, one of the Hindu holy trinities. In a way, it's a synonym of God. And actually, he didn't want to utter the name of God because he was so lost and he had led such a loose, profligate life, had become such a scourge, a great sinner, so that he could not have called upon the name of God when he was about to die. Just when a person reaches that stage of death, his natural accumulated tendencies will come to the surface. He cannot really hide his true nature. So this man wanted to call his son, whose name happened to be the same as Narayana, which is a synonym of God. So as he called his son's name, suddenly his mind went back to his early days. Because as a boy, he was trained in spiritual practices, taking the holy name of God, Narayana, the same name, which later he gave to his own son. So that's how the coincidence took place. So he did not really want to call upon the name of God. He was calling his own son out of state of total helplessness. He was about to die. State of misery, because all the evil companions with whom he was moving had left him. He was in a state of total despair. And he knew that he had led a very sinful life. He was in a state of completely wretched mental condition. So he called upon the name of his son. But so next moment his mind went beyond that, and his mind went back to the early days when he used to chant the same holy name as a part of his spiritual sadhana, spiritual practice. So at that time God's angels appeared. Vishnu Duda, Vishnu's servants, so there's the angels, corresponding angels of Vishnu appeared before him, and they want to take his soul to heaven, to the celestial holy abode of Vishnu. But some others had also come. They were the messengers from hell. You take him to hell because they were judging his life on the basis of his later activities. But the angels and the angels from heaven, that's Vishnu's Duta, Vishnu's messengers, and the messengers who came from hell, they had a heated discussion, a debate, whether he deserved to go to hell or heaven. So in fact, eventually, the messengers who came from the abode of Vishnu won the case. They said, this man at the last moment had uttered the name of God, therefore he deserves to go to heaven. Now, the point that I want to present before you is not whether he went to hell or heaven. The point is, he had practiced some kind of spiritual sadhanas during his early days and remained at the back of his mind, though he didn't want to recollect those experiences. He wanted only to call his son to his side in a state of total helplessness. But the name happened to be the same, so his mind went beyond his son's form. It went back to his own younger days when he used to take the same name as part of his spiritual practice. He used to chant the holy name of Narayana as a young boy. So, and when that memory came back, his mind got linked to that memory. So it is said in the Vedantic tradition, our next life depends upon our thoughts and impressions in our mind with which we leave this body. Now people may tell you, in that case we can do whatever we want. At last moment we will think of some higher things. But it's not possible. Because the impressions that emerge in our mind when the senses are frail, completely weakened, when the mind itself is becoming shaky, then our natural tendencies and propensities will come to the surface. We may be well-trained diplomats, but you've seen the picture of Neville Chamberlain and Hitler shaking hands, 1938 treaty. In politics and diplomacy, we can smile wonderfully and shake hands. But in our subjective life, this is not possible. In our inner life, what we think at the last moment is the totality of all the thoughts that we have thought, all the deeds we have done in our whole life. So I shall elaborate upon this point in the next class, because there is a verse in our one of the most difficult and one of the most fundamental books called Brahma Sutras. Tadantara Pradivattu Remkhadi Samparishoptaka Prasna Nirupanabhyam. It's a long discussion and debate between Shankaracharya and Vyasa